Hello, I'm XRTT, and today, as part of Gamera's 6th anniversary celebration, we'll be covering the fourth film in the series, titled Gamera vs. Viras. As usual, we'll start with a look at what's been happening in world cinema. It was a solid year, with classics like 2001 A Space Odyssey, Once Upon a Time in the West, Rosemary's Baby, Planet of the Apes, and Night of the Living Dead. A lot of excellent films, something for everyone. Godzilla, our main kaiju rival, also have new movie. The Destroy All Monsters premiered. Moving on to the Gamera vs. Viras. In the case of Gamera vs. Gauss, I mentioned that despite the presence of a child as the main female character, the film didn't suffer from excessive infantilization. Good proportion were maintained. Here, well, the number of child characters doubled. Americans contributed money to the film production, but in return, they demanded a more Americanized look, this time from the start. Gamera the Giant Monster was made more appealing to US audiences by adding scenes with Americans. And here, the same tactic was employed from the start. We meet the two protagonists during a large gathering of Boy Scouts from both Japan and the United States. The Japanese is named Masao, the American Jim. The very first scenes with them demonstrate the pattern of the kids being smart and the adults being stupid. One of the kids changes the controls on a submarine that will later play a crucial role, effectively switching the front rear controls. And the adult can't even notice that the controls are reacting to the other way around. And it's not just about humans. Compared to the kids, the aliens aren't very bright either. I should mention that a significant difference here is that the threat to Earth comes from outside. And most of the time, it's not even kaiju size. There is no shortage of kaiju fight scenes, but we have recycling here. The alien seeking a way to defeat Gamera, examining his memories, thus reenacting the fight scene with Gauss. Additionally, the international version also includes scenes from the fight with Barugon. If someone only watches this movie, it probably increases the appeal, more kaiju fights. But as a part of a marathon, we unfortunately have a lot of rehashes. Something we experience a lot in Showa era films, culminating in Gamera Super Monster. But more on that in due time. I whine a lot, but I must admit that this film was one thing that really tortured me. Get right into my sensitive heart. A subplot emerged in which the United Nations debates whether humanity should surrender to the aliens as they demand, or attack and destroy their ship, which would involve killing their children on board. The adults in the command center contact the boys and inform them of the situation, and the kids make the decision themselves, requesting that the ship should be destroyed regardless of them. The atmosphere of this scene is perfect, one of my favorites from the entire Showa era, and certainly my favorite in the non-kaiju related category. However, the United Nations decided to surrender, and in the end, everything ends well, thanks to the boys' action. To be fair, I should also point out that the key advice on how to sabotage the aliens came from one of the adults, so it's not just the children who are using brains here. There are also some surprisingly brutal scenes here. Gamera slamming Viras' head into the ground in the final fight is a bit lighthearted, but the scene where the Williams are decapitated is quite shocking, as is Gamera being stabbed in the middle of his shell by Viras. Very visual and literal. Again, the American release was a 60 different version, the difference this time being the film's rank. There are 3 versions of Gamera vs. Viras overall. According to my understanding, the 72-minute version was released in Japanese theaters. The American series significantly extended 90-minute version, achieved by simply adding more of stock footage from previous films. The director had nothing to do with this longer version, but later he collaborated on a compromise version, 80 minutes long, which contains more added scenes than the theatrical version, but not as many as the extended American version. There's a nice breakdown on moviecensorship.com detailing what was added in each version. As a side note, the film was a box office hit in Japan. It's also one of 3 Showa era films not licensed by Sante Frank Film Syndication in the 80s. I suspect that this is also why it's the first film in the series not to be featured in an episode of Mystery Science T-30,000. And considering that in 2022 we got an episode of that show discussing Gamera vs. Jiger, Gamera vs. Viras remains one of the 2 Showa era films, along with Gamera Super Monster, that never made it onto that show. It was said that the name Viras was chosen in a magazine contest, but the director admitted it wasn't true. The role of the American kid, Jim Morgan, was played by Carl Craig, the son of an American soldier stationed on the island. This was his only acting role. He became professionally involved with the military and the Air Force, but remained active in the fandom, attending Kaiju fan convention and so on. A short documentary, over 12 minutes long, was also produced titled Gamera vs. Viras 25 years later, in which he discusses various behind the scenes aspects of the the film creation, such as how the weapon used by the villains was created, by adding a beer can to the end of a plastic gun, a cheap and effective method. At GFest 2003, Carl recounted that his father has saved all the money he received for his role in the film, which Carl has forgotten about. When Carl joined the military, and his father realized that he didn't have to worry about his finances, he reminded him and gave him the money, which Carl spent on a brand new Corvette. In the US, the film was titled Destroy All Planets, which doesn't have much to do with the content, but it does attempt to draft on the association with Godzilla, whose latest installment was titled Destroy All Monsters. I've already talked a bit about the actors, so now it's time for a typical acting segment. A few words about the actors who have appeared in more than one Gamera film. Yoshiro Kitahara played in 4 Gamera movies. In Gamera the Giant Monster, he was Mr. Sakurai. In Gamera vs. Barugon, he appeared as Professor Amano. In Gamera vs. Gauss as Dr. Aoki, and finally, here he was Masao's father. Nehiko Takada also appeared in 4 Gamera movies. He appeared as Soviet representative in Gamera the Giant Monster, and Shinkansen customer in Gamera vs. Gauss, as Jimmy's father here, and as Foig helicopter pilot in Gamera vs. Jigger. Koji Fujiyama also played 4 roles. In Gamera the Giant Monster, his role was US Arctic Base Commander, if you choose the info from the IMDb, or Raffinery staff if you prefer the Vikzilla as source. He played Onodera in Gamera vs. Barugon, the commander of Self-Defense Force here, and Dr. Tom Wallace in Gamera vs. Zigra. Sho Natsuki played in 6 movies. You can see him as Ichiro Hirata in Gamera vs. Barugon. In Gamera vs. Gauss, he was Self-Defense Force General. Here he appeared as Villain C. In Gamera vs. Guiron as News Reporter. In Gamera vs. Jigger as Dr. Suzuki. And in Gamera vs. Zigra as Doctor. Kojiro Hongo played Keisuke Hirata in Gamera vs. Barugon. In Gamera vs. Gauss, he was Foreman Shiro Tsutsumi. Here he appeared as Scoutmaster Mr. Shimada. He also played Captain of the Nojima in Gamera Guardian of the Universe, making him a solid exception, possibly the only actor to have participated in both Showa and Heisei era Gamera movies. Ken Nakahara played his character named Villain D. He also appeared in Gamera Super Monster as Fish Seller C. Junko Yashiro played Masako Shibata here. In Gamera vs. Jigger, she played Miwako Kitayama. Kenichiro Yamada is an interesting case. Here, he appeared as Villain E. In Gamera vs. Barugon, he played Man at Observatory, and in Gamera the Giant Monster, you can see him as Geothermal Station Engineer. And these trios are the only ones listed on his IMDb page. An actor would dedicate his whole career to Gamera. Well, he was more like an extra than actor, but still, this was sweet actor Teruo Aragaki's last time playing Gamera, a role he had played since Gamera vs. Barugon. Time to take a look at appearances of this work in other film or TV series. As I mentioned, it wasn't discussed in Mystery Science 30,000, making this section much shorter. It's actually limited to 3 things. The first is 1997 film Gokuto Kuroshikagi, where one of the actors watched a script from this film on the laptop. The second is the anime series, episode 20 of the Pani Pony Dashu series, titled A Wise Man Will Know How to Approach Danger, where Viras has a cameo. The third is Franklin. The first season of Franklin TV series has an episode titled Franklin in the Dark, adapting the book on the same name. Franklin is afraid of the darkness on his shell. In the book, his imagination gives him vision of generic monster lurking with it, but in the series, the creators decided to give us a nice Easter egg. The 4 Zirpy monsters are based on Gamera classic adversaries. We can recognize Gauss, Viras, Jigger, and Barugon. Physical release includes VHS, DVD, Blu-ray. We got individual release and sets of more than one movie. My favorite release from Arrow, which I talked about in more detail in my video about Gamera the Giant Monster, is quite rich. We get all 3 versions of the film. I already discussed the differences between them. Of course, we get the original audio, English dubbing, and subtitles. The commentary was recorded by Carl Craig and Jim Kironello. The first movie I already spent some time with today, as he played one of the kids. This is probably my favorite audio commentary of all 12 in the set. I highly recommend it. It's full of great stories. And the standard, I must mention the German release, which again includes Frankenstein in the title. This time it can be translated as Gamera vs. Viras, Frankenstein Space Monster Attack. In terms of comics, we essentially have the basic set. The manga released in 1968, along the film premiere, and the manga from the new series, lasted in 1995, and adapting all the film from the Showa era. In this series, Gamera vs. Viras was the 4th volume. Going back to the time of the film premiere, something else was also listed. Part actual book, part storybook. It is indeed a very nice thing for fans. I'm glad to add something like this to my collection. As usual, in terms of merchandise, there are several Viras figurines, both individual and dioramas featuring him and Gamera, including a key fight scene. And of course, larger sets, such as this featuring Gamera and all his opponents from the Showa era. Collectors have plenty to collect. The next recording will be about Gamera vs. Guiron, but for now, that's all. Thank you for watching, leave a like and subscribe if you liked it, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Bye!